Hello, and welcome to Creatives in Conversation, a podcast series created by myself, visionary artist Roberto Picasso. In today's conversation, I'll be speaking with artist and curator Bobby Benjamin. So I have had a little bit of a chat with Bobby there, and what I did explain was that usually I start off with a question. And the first question that I usually start off with is, can you describe to us what it is that you create?
Hello, Roberto. Thanks for having me on. To describe what I create, I guess it's twofold. In my personal practice, I create things from found objects and paint. And those things can take any manner of shapes and sizes, I guess. I work across a range of styles. I'm quite loose with my visual language. But yeah, I make things that hang on walls or display on a gallery floor or wherever the materials dictate, I guess. And I also, I suppose, I make platforms for other artists to do the same via my curatorial work with Pineapple Black and Picasso Baby.
Could you explain a little bit more about how you're involving other artists? Because you mentioned there Pineapple Black and Picasso Baby. How do those things take form? What are those projects, would you say?
I try and stay away from the word gallery because I think we're something different to that. But Pineapple Black's an art space and an arts organisation that puts on exhibitions, among other things. We like working with the emerging artists that we have on Teesside. There's so much talent around here, so we like working with those guys. But then we like to bring people into Teesside, and yeah, a lot of it is about kind of showcasing their work, or in the case of Picasso Baby, collaborating with those artists and building things with them, which is something I've always been very interested in. I find working with other artists excites me, and it tends to be a really good learning process for me to kind of work with another artist, and it's something I've always really valued. And going back, I guess, to my time at university, I worked with a small collective of artists, and we opened an art space, the House of Blah Blah, and it was all about kind of working with other people and collaborating. And I just find that's something that really stimulates me as much as, I enjoy working towards a solo. I always tend to think that's something that needs to be a bit more considered and more of a labour of love, and I spend time with that. And in the meantime, I like to put on shows, and it kind of becomes sketchbook to me because I show the artists that I'm looking at and that I'm interested in, and I try and work with them. And yeah, so that's what we do. We put on shows and events and arts-based things that for people to see and do.
I must make a mention, Bobby. I have met you before obviously this conversation, and I did study at Teesside University, and I think my connection to you kind of goes a little bit further back than most artists that I'm actually interviewing on this podcast. But something that I would like to mention is that I kind of got the sense of what you were creating. You were able to create a lot of energy around something. I always noticed that whatever you almost touched seemed to turn to gold in some sense. I don't know if that's the way that you see it, but I know in particular with House of Blah Blah, even some things before that when you were sort of having projects with maybe fellow students and stuff, there'd be a lot of energy around it. And what I mean by that is like a lot of people would seem to come together. I think there's a social aspect, which I think you're quite talented at. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, well, I think that comes from before I ever kind of really took art seriously, and going back to when I was originally studying photography at college. And I worked with a guy called Fashion Phil, who ran a club night called Creeps, and that was my kind of first kind of work experience in public engagement and kind of you know community based projects. So I think I took a lot from the way he ran his club night and then tried to apply it to the things I wanted to do, which, in our case was putting on exhibitions. So I think that did kind of inject a different approach to it and a different energy. And then I think that kind of coupled with the fact that we were kind of doing interesting work still as well. It kind of wasn't just like the party as much as the party was great, especially back then. But I think we were doing interesting things visually as well, and it was quite well considered. So we kind of had a nice crossover, I think, where we would get people who were into art who would want to come down to see the art, and then we were able to kind of attract all our friends who wanted to come down and have a beer, who maybe wouldn't normally go to an exhibition. And I think, yeah, it just created a kind of perfect storm of energy. I watched a documentary recently called Supersonic about Oasis, and while kind of a lot of their sort of laddish behaviour hasn't stood the test of time, there was, unless you were kind of around then, it's hard to kind of realise the energy that they kind of had. And I think me and the girl I used to work with back then on House of Blah Blah, we were big Oasis fans, so we kind of always sort of dreamt big with it. It was never kind of, we never wanted to find a little space and invite a couple of our friends down. It was like, let's put posters out and build excitement and try and build something that kind of has energy. And I think that energy kind of, yeah, it was there. And I think it's kind of lasted on since. And over time, kind of Middlesbrough's art scenes kind of came along and it's way deeper and richer now than it ever was. But I think that kind of initial energy really kind of fed into kind of creating that momentum that we've kind of kept ever since as a town.
Yeah, I mean, I really commend you for that, and I think there's something quite powerful in what you've done in the sense of crossing over into different worlds, and also creating momentum in the art community in Middlesbrough. Because when I first moved to Middlesbrough for a fine art degree, there wasn't as much colour. I'd use the word colour. I'm just thinking particularly on some of the streets, how some of the streets have come to life now, with some new businesses coming in, but a lot more of arts coming in. And I know with House of Blah Blah and now with your Pineapple Black, there seems to be more stuff happening. So I definitely put it to you that you're a bit of a catalyst for the creative community in Middlesbrough. But sort of from there, I know that you've kind of touched upon a little bit about community. I'm quite interested to know a little bit about what themes have sort of been going through your work in particular, and maybe go into those projects as well.
Yeah, so I guess the main themes, the main strands that have existed in my work throughout, what I'd call kind of the last 8 years, which all feels like one project to me, I suppose. And that's things like class, place, masculine identity. A lot of these things that, the universal themes, but then also kind of very intrinsic to my life and the setting I live in. And they're things I'm always looking to explore. And, while the work doesn't only hinge on these things, I tend to think they're the main plot line. And I've described, I guess, my body of work before as being like a bit like a novel, and there'll be different characters and it'll take you to different places, but there is a kind of core storyline, and yeah, and that's very much a reaction to kind of my life, my background, where I'm from, my current circumstance. And I mean, I was born in Middlesbrough. I grew up in Redcar, which is a kind of, a small seaside town, with no kind of real, art scene, or at least not when I was growing up. Then Middlesbrough, I moved back to in my 20s, and I've been back living here over a decade now, and a lot of my work I've made kind of while I've been centered, in Middlesbrough town, in the rough parts of town. And I think, one of the things that was a big influence on me when I was first making artwork was you would read a lot of news stories at the time. They were coming up and taking pictures of certain streets in Gresham where I lived. And I remember there was one, a Daily Mail article that kind of concluded with this line, death or life in Gresham. It's not as simple a choice as you may think. And they would always use this photo that was like the street where I lived. It was always that photo that you would see. And yeah, I think it just kind of sparked something off in me. And then kind of coming and working in the arts, which is such a kind of, an imbalanced industry in terms of class, where, only 16% of the kind of arts industry is kind of owns up to being working class. So instantly there's that kind of juxtaposition and that kind of duality, which is in my life. And so then it has to be explored in my work as well, because a lot of my work is quite autobiographical. And I think that comes over then into the materials I use too, which again, I always try and reflect my circumstance and kind of, it's that sort of, through the study of self, reflect society, I guess. And, my kind of circumstances or kind of my social economic background is no different to many, many people in the area that I live in. So I sometimes think by exploring things that affect my life, I can also kind of agitate other people's stories, perhaps. So yeah, when I'm choosing materials, I've worked with things like they use these big metal grids to board up a lot of the houses where I'm from, and I would take them down and light them and things like that and put them in a gallery setting where then kind of they would provoke so many different reactions and conversations, because some people knew exactly what that was and where I got it from, but in a gallery setting, to other people, it was a piece of sculpture. It was modern art, So yeah, I'm very interested in kind of, trying to kind of, not try and generalize too much. And, if my work's political, it's just because it's honest and politics affect our lives, but I don't try and be overtly political either. I think what I'm trying to do is present something that's a lot more idiosyncratic, and then I think it has a greater chance then of speaking to people outside of the arts bubble, which is what I've always wanted my work to do. I don't want people to feel like they need to have an MA to get what it is that I'm doing. Although I still want you to enjoy it if you've got an MA too, so yeah, I think that's what feeds into what I do and the materials I choose and what I'm trying to do with it, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Bobby, whilst you were sort of mentioning those themes and stuff, it sort of comes down to a bit of a grittiness around the subject matter that you are dealing with. And I was just kind of like watching your expressions and kind of thing. And when you were talking about bringing people together and a lot of people coming around the table, I noticed that you kind of lit up, and I could see that you got a lot of positive energy from that. And then when you started talking about your themes, you kind of became a bit more serious in a sense. So it sounds to me that you're dealing with two different aspects of your practice, really, which is about bringing people together in community, and then the more serious subjects. But at the same time, you kind of like you touch upon the serious stuff. But I mean, even the way you kind of describe it, you're kind of touching upon it, but you don't want to focus too much on it. It's almost like I'm making you aware of this thing, but I'm not going to create any pressure upon you. So is there a reason why you're not serious, or not that you're not serious? Is there any reason why you do kind of take a step back and don't? Because I know there's some artists that will just go full on steam ahead and talk very much in depth about a subject like class or poverty or something like that?
Yeah, I think what I'm always trying to do, I guess, with my work, you know, and because it is personal, the work that I make, is I guess not only reflect my own circumstance, but also my own attitude towards it. And, I've never been a person kind of, no matter how much, I might be struggling or how many hard knocks I have, the person I am is to kind of, I have, what do they call it, like a gallows humor about things, and I will kind of try and look for the positive and okay, what can we do about this? Let's have a laugh about this. And so yeah, I'm always quite keen on that my work does that too. So yeah, I think I'm always happy to kind of to go and speak out on these themes of kind of class and social deprivation and the things I look at. The things I'm very much happy to discuss, but then in my work, I don't think it would be reflective of me or of kind of, northern people if it kind of, wallowed in that too much. I think there also has to be something celebratory there. Like, I mean, I love Middlesbrough. I wouldn't move out of Middlesbrough for all its faults and for the kind of bad parts, of society that I highlight. There's always a good to it too, isn't there? And I think there's always, there's that strength, there's the resolve, there's the humor, and those things are there too. And life and people are very, multifaceted, and I want my work to be that way too. And yeah, I think, yeah, sometimes it's about kind of highlighting these issues, but then not lingering on them too long. Like, I want you to know they're there, but I want you to know that this is my attitude towards them too. So, yeah, I think that kind of, that mixture of serious and light, it's kind of, yeah, that kind of, it's chaos, but there's a tranquility to chaos too, I think. And I mean, especially kind of coming from my background, I'm from a wild old family. My dad went to prison. A few of my brothers have been to prison. I'm the youngest of 8 boys, so I've kind of seen it all in my lifetime, and I'm kind of still here with a smile on my face. So I want the work to have that resolve too.
So you mentioned a little bit there about your family. I'm curious to know a little bit about your background and how you sort of came into the art. I mean, have you always been interested in art? Or is it something that sort of come in later on?
I mean, art was something, in such a limited capacity. It was very much a part of our house. But it was, art, as far as I was concerned, until probably my mid-20s, was drawing with a pencil on paper. So, and that was something we were always encouraged to do as kids. My eldest brother, he was the other creative in the family. And we're the only two who've ever kind of done anything creative. And he passed away when I was really young. But growing up, our mum would get she would get his binder out and show me the work. And that always kind of, I think that kind of created something deep in me that was there, ready to be rediscovered at a later age. That art had something magical and special about it to me, because it was this thing that we would get around the table and would have a look at, and I would try and copy the drawings. And I mean, we all drew. All my brothers drew, I think. But yeah, and I know, like, kind of growing up in our house, as a child, I remember things like the YBAs being on TV and Tracy Emin's Bed, and our mum was always like, "That's not art. That's not art." But she never actually told us what was art. So I think what I was left with was this kind of false impression that what art was just drawing on paper. I took art at school as one of my options. The only work I did while I was there was drawing on paper. I came out with a bad grade at the end. And that was kind of the end of art for me, I thought. And yeah, like, kind of growing up in Redcar, none of my friends were into art. None of them did that. So it was always kind of more music and writing was the interest for me. And right through my kind of, teenage years and into my mid-20s, I always kind of saw myself as maybe being a writer. And I would do my poems and stories. I was in a band with my friends. So that was always more the avenue that I thought was realistic. Up until, I guess, I was around maybe 25, 26. I moved through to Middlesbrough. I was going out with a girl who studied fine art at CCAD, and she would drag me into MIMA, and it was one of them. She had to drag me in there, and then she had to drag me back out because I just fell in love with the place, and yeah, it just opened my eyes, and I thought, well, hang on, this isn't what I got sold at as. I thought, all of a sudden I realized it was a lot more limitless, and full of so much more possibility than I'd kind of ever imagined. And that was like a switch being flicked in my head, and all of a sudden I couldn't not see art everywhere I looked. And it was probably photographs first. I became really interested in the camera, and everywhere I was going, I would see a photograph, and I would photograph these things. Then after a while, that wasn't enough, and I wanted to set things up, and I would make set pieces and develop storylines, and always be photographing. And yeah, it would be very kind of DIY at home on a night, just kind of setting things up. And then when it came to kind of presenting that, I felt really limited by the confines of a photograph, and I was far more interested in the installation that surrounded the photograph, which I guess then led me on to fine art. So yeah, I studied fine art at Teesside, messed around a bit for the first year. I think I would struggle with things like crits, because back then my work was very, very personal and very raw, and not so kind of it wasn't wrapped up in as much bubble wrap. The things that I was talking about in it were a lot more closer to the surface and there to be seen. And so I wouldn't always feel comfortable with things like crits, because I felt like every time I did a crit, it was a therapy session, and I didn't really like that. So I think that kind of taught me then to look at art and think, how can it do the things I need it to do personally, but then say the things I want it to say publicly, and how can I kind of put that duality in there? And I really became fascinated with that. I guess around the same time I'd moved in with another artist off the course, and back then we didn't have a TV, so, and we never used to have any gas on at the house. We had no central heating at the house, so it was always really cold in winter. So we'd get up on a morning and just graft in the studio all day, and we'd sit there and we'd stay on a night, and we were there so often that the cleaning ladies got to know us, and they'd let us stay in until they'd finished like cleaning up, and that was great. Our third year at uni, we were just in the studio all the time. We lived there, and and then we'd come home on a night, because we didn't have TV. We'd just sit and talk about art all night, and yeah, just kind of really got in deep with it, and yeah, I mean, from that point on, there was no kind of looking back. I think the first time I did an exhibition, I knew like this was what I wanted to do with my life. And I remember me mum and stepdad came down to my first exhibition, and they did not approve of me at 26 sort of quitting the day job and pursuing a career in the arts at all. But they came down and seen that first show that we did, and heard me talk about my work, and realised why I was doing it, and that it was more than just the thing I was making, but it was the books I was reading, and everything, and yeah, they were sold then, and they were like, okay, we've got your back on this, like we'll support you any way we can, we believe in this. And yeah, I think that was just the point. From there, it was like, this is what I want to be in life. I want to devote myself to something. I want to give something 10 years, and I'd kind of gone from job to job to job to job. I wanted something where, okay, I'm going to throw myself into this and give it everything I can, and it's good back to me as well. It keeps. I think it's great for my mental health, and I've met so many cool people, and it's opened so many doors to me. And while I might not make any money out of it very often, on so many other levels, it's just been invaluable to me.
Well, that's it's very powerful. I gotta say, Bobby, what comes up when you speak is very much honesty. I think you're an incredibly honest person, and your artwork kind of, to me, when I see it, it's almost an extension of your honesty, which is another way of your communicating. I'm interested to know about those, a bit more about those materials that you're using. You mentioned about the metal coverings that go on the windows in Middlesbrough. And I know the image that I have in Middlesbrough. I remember one of the streets that I'd stayed in one of the years when I was at uni, was just most of the houses were covered in this sort of metal sheets over the windows. You just kind of got this sense of like of poverty, or just like derelict environment where things have just been forgotten or just abandoned. And it's interesting to know that you've kind of got that bravery to take those off. You're kind of being quite disruptive in the street, aren't you? But to take something off like that, I don't know where your courage comes from with that.
Well, I've always been a bit of a tearaway, and yeah, and I guess around there nobody calls the police, so it's. I remember the day I got it, and it was a great big one, and we'd gone down and we were just kind of, God, I hope nobody from the council's watching this, but we just sort of unbolted this thing from the wall, and we were walking back through central Middlesbrough with it. And we got stopped a couple of times, and it'd just be people like, "Oh, have you got a light, mate?" Nobody questioned why we were carrying this thing around. It was just kind of the norm. And yeah, I always kind of, I describe my approach as beg, steal, or borrow. And yeah, I guess sometimes we do. We might have to take something that we're not supposed to have. I mean, one of the key materials in the last couple of years of my practice has been it's a polymer, it's reformed polymer. So I worked at a recycling plant in between. So this was after I left the House of Blah Blah. I'd taken on a job at a power plant. It was at Biffa Polymers, a recycling plant, and it's one of them jobs that anybody can probably get it at the level I was in. You're wading around in people's rubbish all day, and kind of, as much as that kind of seems gross and was fairly gross, it kind of appealed to my nature of kind of looking through the things other people have thrown away and seeing what I could have. And yeah, I was the only kind of artist who worked there, and the only artist most of the people who worked there had ever met. And they were quite fascinated by that. And so, yeah, one of the things as I worked there was, so all the rubbish comes in and it goes through its process, and they're selling on recycled plastic for food packaging. So obviously, some of the plastic, maybe if something was a detergent bottle, the toxicity level in that plastic's going to be too high for it to go back into food consumption. So that passes through the line. And then at the end of the line, what you get is this kind of molten pulp that spews out of the machine in these kind of Geiger-esque kind of these swirling forms. And it's literally the kind of the waste product of the waste product, too toxic to kind of go back out. And this kind of comes out as a molten pulp into a cooling bath and then sets. And this is lying all over the floor when I'm working in this kind of recycling plant. And at first I would maybe slip one in my bag, and after a while I needed more. I was going back like a drug addict. I just need more of this plastic, please. Give me some more plastic. But yeah, we kind of were, I didn't work there that long, but I was able to kind of do a deal with Biffa after I left. And they were very keen to kind of support me as an artist. And I must say, Biffa have been fantastic in what they've done, and the value of what they've given me kind of to this day in that material, because even that waste product then sells on for something else to them. So, and they've kept me with a steady stream of that. And yeah, it goes back to the same thing of kind of the duality that I see in the material, and kind of, how it's one thing in that factory to those workmen. It was just a throwaway a throwaway thing. It was the last thing at the end of the line, and that went in a sack, and I never saw it again or thought about it. It was just rubbish. But then you kind of take that and you put that in a gallery and you show it to somebody who hasn't worked in a recycling factory, and it's art, and I find that so interesting. And yeah, I think, it's the same with everything that I use. Every material. I mean, I've been working a lot during lockdown with paint, and even then, I've been very specific to only work with found paint, and I like that kind of creative restraint too. Of the object then dictates your parameters, doesn't it? A metal grid from the front of a house is never going to be a jug of water. I have to work within the kind of, within its own visual kind of parameters and its physical parameters. And I like that kind of creative restraint. And I think even going back to uni, I've always been interested in a kind of creative restraint. And I was always quite into things like George Perec and the Oulipo movement. And yeah, I think it's using found objects exclusively, I think gives me that.
Wow. I think you kind of you've gone back to how you're saying when you've gone for different jobs, that you kind of return back to the arts in some way. So you've worked at the polymer plant, and you haven't just done your job and gone, oh, this is just a separate part of my life. I kind of get the sense that maybe, I don't know if Magpie is something that's ever been connected with yourself in any way, Bobby. It kind of got me thinking a little bit about what your experience is walking on the streets of Middlesbrough and seeing rubbish on the side of the road. What are do you have any feelings about that or anything like that?
Well, I mean, aside from the obvious kind of environmental concerns, I mean, I would much rather live in a world where nobody threw any rubbish out on the street. Although my practice might be hindered significantly, so I'm not going to complain too much about that. But yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of, ever since I was a kid, I was always far more interested in kind of finding things, and it might be some pegs and some stones, and playing with that and rearranging those than I kind of was with playing with a toy car and yeah, I'm always kind of finding something. I went through a phase of I kept finding teddies. I found a ventriloquist's puppet and a bunch of teddies all over the space of 2 years. So I went through a period of restoring these teddies and stitching them back up and washing them and bringing them back to health. And yeah, so I'm kind of, I will put a use to anything. And I mean, my girlfriend, she's constantly coming home like, oh, will you use this? Is this any use to you? Just piles of random things. And I'll put it all under the stairs, and most of it will get used at some point. So yeah, yeah, I mean, sometimes you walk around and there's parts of town that's such a mess, and it does speak to the kind of the poverty that's there and the lack of care that kind of goes into a town like Middlesbrough, I think, sometimes. And yeah, so that's kind of, but then that's relevant to my practice too, though, I think, because in general terms, I mean, that pile of rubbish left out in the street, or that material that's too toxic that's waste at the recycling plant, they kind of have their narrative too, and I can draw a lot of parallels between that and the town and its people, and the way these towns sometimes get forgotten and mistreated, and the people in them do too.
Yeah, I think you're kind of touching upon some really powerful themes there, and I think you have got a certain talent for being able to pick the objects in particular. I guess the honesty kind of comes through when you are limiting yourself, rather than going into an art shop and buying some oil paints and creating a fantastic picture. Um, maybe that the reason you don't do that is because of the honesty side to it, which is, we're not really raised. I mean, some people might be raised within an art shop with oil paints, that the material itself is so distant from us. And to kind of invite that in is not necessarily to reflect as clearly the environment that you come from. Whilst you were talking a little bit about materials, making me think of Slavoj Žižek when he talks about ecology, and he says that people who are a fan of ecology would be able to go into a landfill site and think it's beautiful, and see so much. And I imagine that if you were to go into a landfill site, whether it's connected to Middlesbrough or Place, that you would maybe feel quite at home there. I don't know if that's accurate. I do have a question which I've asked a few people, which often comes out with some interesting ideas. But I think in a way you might already have an answer to this question. So the question is, if there was one thing that you could change about the world, what would it be?
Wow. God, there's so many I want to change. I'm just mentally sifting through the long list. I mean, I think I seen somebody post today about how success is judged, and how the general kind of consensus for what is a successful person is kind of intrinsically linked to finances, and when we do tell somebody that when somebody is told that there's other forms of success, it's normally by somebody who's already financially successful, and I think and that's something that really applies to me. I mean, people are always telling me that kind of how successful I've been at what I do. And then sometimes when I'm sat around with my friends who are my age, who all have mortgages, I kind of sit there feeling like a massive failure. And I think it's a lot of that comes down to money. And I just think money complicates things so much and dilutes things so much. And it's something I always try and separate from my own kind of creative process. I never try and think about the value of a piece or the financial outcome of a project, and that's probably to my detriment at times. But I think if there was a way to kind of remove money from the world, I know in kind of practical terms that just wouldn't work, but or an more even distribution of wealth perhaps would work, which I guess people have tried and it didn't too. So one thing I could change about the world, maybe I like the idea. There's a meme going around at the moment about if you're a billionaire, once you reach billionaire status, you should get a certificate that says I completed capitalism, and the rest of your money should go back into the community. So I'd go with that. Yeah, let's redistribute the wealth of the most wealthy.
That's a powerful response, Bobby. I like that response. I did read an interview that you had. I think it was with Mima, and you'd mentioned how on a molecular level we're all the same, but yet our experiences are different. I don't know if that's exactly the way you said it, but I think there's something quite powerful there about how we are all the same, but yet we're not even of any choice of our own. We're having completely different experiences. It's a powerful thing, really, to talk about financial distribution. And I know when I've asked that question, sometimes what comes up for people is how how would it work, or how do I go about doing it? I know when I've interviewed some people that they've tried to actually figure out how that happens, and kind of set themselves a hard task. But yeah, I think is a very honest response to that question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean you touched upon the comment I made in the Mima interview, which you did have almost word perfect, by the way. But yeah, I think it's very much kind of going back to that when I think about that polymer farm and how all the kind of the conveyor belt of different plastics and different things arrive and then they all kind of end up the same thing. And yeah, I think we are kind of we're all humans, aren't we? And if there was a way that we could all be nicer to each other and more supportive of each other, that would be great. And I think kind of everybody having the same, or at least starting from the same point, so it's only your own fault if you fuck it all up, you know what I mean? Like, that would be cool. But yeah, it's a lovely way to fantasize, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So I'm just wondering, Bobby, where can people find you if they want to find out more about your work?
So the best place to find me is on Instagram at Bobby Benjamin. Yeah, everything that I do goes up on Instagram first. So yeah, that's my primary contact. If you want to check out the projects that I'm working on, also on Instagram, we have Pineapple Black, our contemporary art space, which is at Pineapple Black Arts. And then my other collaborative arts project, Picasso Baby, which is at Picasso_Baby_Borough. But yeah, everything goes up on the Instagram, so you can find out everything there first and see all these lovely things you've heard me talk about.
Thank you very much, Bobby. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I wish you all the best for your upcoming projects. I know that there will be a success because you've got a long history of being able to put projects together and attract a good amount of people to them. So thanks for the conversation, Bobby.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it too, and yeah, I can't think of a nicer way to have spent my Sunday afternoon than catching up with you on your podcast. And yeah, now I wish you every success with the podcast and with your own practice too. Which, if anybody doesn't know who is watching, go and check out Roberto's arts practice because he's great too.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.